Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage music supervisor and founding president of the Guild of Music Supervisors, Maureen Crow.
女士们、先生们，请欢迎音乐总监工会创始主席兼音乐总监 Maureen Crow 女士。
Susan, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much. So our panel this morning is going to be about the impact music has on storytelling in media. And I hope we give you great insights into this and how you can save time, money, and translate story into a more engaging experience all over the world. I'd like to introduce first Evian Clean. If you've seen an HBO movie, chances are Neophonic, Evian Clean's company, has music supervised it. He's an Emmy Award winner and a 5-time Guild of Music Supervisor winner. Evian is currently the music supervisor on the award-winning and critically acclaimed HBO TV series Game of Thrones and Westworld. Is Ev coming in? Hey, Ev.
Hi, Maureen.
Hi. So the next panelist we have is Kenny Ortega. He's the producer and the director of The Descendants 2. That is a Disney Channel juggernaut right now. He has work as a director and choreographer, and the producer is known and loved by millions of people around the world. He's a 3-time Emmy winner and has won 2 Director Guilds of America awards for his work as a director, and he also has much acclaim as a choreographer in and of itself. He's also known for the High School Musical franchise. Please welcome Kenny Ortega.
Morning.
Morning, Kenny.
I like that you have your own walk-on music.
I know. Christopher Tin is our next panelist. He's a 2-time Grammy-winning composer. He's best known for his video game work on Civilization 2. It was the first piece of music from a video game ever to win a Grammy Award. He is the composer of Suddenly 17, which opened #1 in China last December, and is a Chinese-produced romantic comedy. Christopher Tin. And our next panelist is Alex Pistavas. She is a 3-time Grammy Award nominee. She is a founder of Chop Shop Music. She has raised the bar for the quality of existing music selected in television, including Grey's Anatomy, The OC, Gossip Girl, which is very popular, I understand, in China, Scandal, How to Get Away with Murder, Lucifer, Marvel's Runaways, and currently Riverdale. Alex Pistavas. Thank you all for being here. I think we will just start with Evian to tell us all about Game of Thrones and what the process is from the producer's point of view, as how important the music is, or is it important to the storyline?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you that in Game of Thrones in particular is extremely important. And actually the story about how Ramin Djawadi got to the show started with those guys hiring a composer and not having it work out. And I got a call because I also consult for HBO for music, and they said, can you meet with these guys? And we went in, and I went in and saw the pilot, sat down with them, and literally out of the blue, they said, if you're gonna hire somebody right now, who would you hire? And I said, Ramin Djawadi. I didn't know where he was. I didn't know if he was working. He was too busy. He said he initially turned the job down, but the producers, this goes to how important music was to them, and the studio anteed up to switch things around. We figured out how to make it work for him. I had to call him on the weekend, convince him to meet the filmmakers, and once he met the filmmakers, then we had to figure out how to change the schedule around for his.
And why did you think of Ramin?
But I had been listening to Ramin's music, and when I watched the pilot, I asked them questions about what wasn't working with the composer that they had, and literally, he just said, I said, you want someone like Ramin Djawadi. He can do X, Y, and Z. He can do orchestral. He can do hybrid music. And they immediately looked him up on IMDb and were looking at what he did and said, let's meet him. And then, of course, I had to figure out.
So was it they wanted greater scale, or they wanted?
Yeah, I think it was true traditional. The approach that they were taking was too traditional for them. And for the process of getting to the sound of Game of Thrones once he was hired, it was actually kind of fun. We would meet on Tuesdays at Ramin's studio, and we'd go through music, and there were certain things that we kind of considered taboo. We were not trying to do a show that harkened back to jolly old England. We stopped. There was no flutes. There was no lutes. Like, we worked through a palette of instruments to get ourselves to a place where it felt like the show was original. It could live in a fantasy land. It could live in the visceral reality of what the show was at the same time.
So it was a very specific music design.
Yeah, and you hand it to Ramin because he, I mean, the lead instrument is an acoustic instrument, and the emotional aspect of it's a cello, but it took a while of trial and error to kind of create the sound of the show. And everybody was completely committed to that and patient about that idea.
Should we show the clips?
Sure, let me set the clip up. So, speaking of Ramin's music, and music having an impact, I picked a clip that is the wrap-up of season 6, and it first will show you, it's about 2 minutes long, I just took a section of it, with no music, and then immediately afterwards, it plays through with music, and you can see how much faith that the showrunners have in music for this show. It's a really big character in the show, as if you watch the show, you know. So that's the setup to let it rip.
Okay. Get ready for the dragon. And now.
Slight difference.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, just a little bit of difference. And for the record, that is a Prague orchestra and choir.
I mean, it takes you from, like, the first time I'm looking at the special effects, like, wow, so many boats, isn't that great? The dragon looks really cool. And then with the music, I'm, like, totally emotionally invested.
Emotionally and viscerally, I think, it really does take you.
How much time does the producer take on this? I mean, how serious? I mean, you work on a lot of HBO projects. Just in context, Is it how much time and energy you put into the music? Does it pay off?
Yes, it does, and I have to commend HBO. They're very gracious with how we budget for music, I think, and the post schedule is very accommodating. You know, we do other things outside of HBO, and it's a drastic difference the time you have to finish each episode, and it goes up, and HBO spends a lot of time doing that. And when Ramin and I were talking about, well, we need to do, you know, we're going to need an orchestral element to this, we're going to need a choir to this, we went back and said, we're going to need additional money to do X, Y, and Z. They didn't hesitate because it had such an impact on the show that we even went back and re-recorded the main title with an orchestra because initially it wasn't.
It makes that much difference.
Yeah,
Yeah. And you've done tours with Game of Thrones now and Spotify.
Yes. So the marketing aspect of what the music has brought is we release a soundtrack every year. We sell out of the vinyl every year. And we've done a couple of marketing things at Spotify, like we put together playlists for every character in the show, and then you as a Spotify viewer can go to Spotify. I don't know if this is still up. This is for season 4. And you could go on and it would read your Spotify list and tell you what character of Game of Thrones that you were.
So cool.
Yeah.
So
I was Arya, by the way.
So, you know, now moving on to Kenny, and, you know, just to talk about that kind of dramatic impact music can have in a story and how people live with it afterwards. Let's take a look and talk a little bit about The Descendants, which is, you know, Descendants 2, you were telling me it's one of the 100 million. How many people are watching the show?
Well, our first Descendants Disney Channel original movie was seen by over 100 million viewers.
Nice.
Just an incredible amount of music downloads and video views, and on a international level. And now Descendants 2 is opening tonight all through Great Britain and Japan. And everywhere that the film has opened has just been doing extraordinary numbers.
So, I mean, you're a choreographer. Obviously, you deal with music a lot, but you're also just an incredible director. Just talk about the process in terms of a special director. Not everyone has that ability, you know, to actually sit there and do a narrative and understand how the songs work, or how do they work?
Yeah, for me as a dancer in the beginning, and as a choreographer, I've always enjoyed choreography as language. So for me, whether it was in concert, or a music video, or a television movie, or a feature, choreography was always language for me. So it came naturally for me to be able to interpret story through movement, with movement, and of course music. And I've played with it in so many different capacities. I mean, there are projects that I've done that are scored, and where the score, like in Game of Thrones, is really driving and bringing emotion, you know, into the story. But also music-driven, for example, like Dirty Dancing, where you're not breaking into song, but the music is there, and it's sort of in an organic capacity to help tell a story. And then with the Disney Channel, with High School Musical and Descendants, we're breaking into song, you know. And in that respect, we take a script and we break it down and we investigate it and we decide where we feel music, lyric, and choreography can enhance the storytelling.
Are there points that you always try to hit with songs? I mean, we have an example of one of them. Do you want to set up Chilling?
Sure. It's following Game of Thrones is a little bit like going on stage after Michael Jackson, but I'll do my best.
They're totally different. I mean, I think I mentioned this earlier from my research in what's popular in China. There's a lot of song reality shows, singing shows, like, you know, competition kind of shows. And we're going to, you know, Alex will talk a little bit about the popularity of Gossip Girls, where it's like a narrative and the inner life of it. But I have not seen too many narrative performance shows. So in terms of the producers out there that are looking for, you know, see Kenny after the show. Yeah, you know, that's it, basically. So I think there's insight here that you can give to our fellow creators in China of an avenue that they haven't done by the process of it and what the songs and casting and what you need to look for in talent and how it's just a different kind of genre, basically. Not everything can be Game of Thrones or Gossip Girl or, Suddenly 17.
Well, this is family-driven entertainment, and it is a Disney Channel original motion picture called Descendants 2. It's our second in the franchise. And in this particular musical clip, three young characters that were born on the Isle of the Lost to heritage evil characters. The daughter of the evil queen, the son of Jafar, and the son of Cruella de Vil are taking King Ben, who is the son of Beauty and the Beast, into the Isle, and they're trying to teach him the ways of the Isle. This is a guy that is a fish out of water at the moment that this begins, and they're trying to instruct him on how to sort of be a little invisible so that he's not drawing attention and attracting a crowd that he's going to have to deal with. Called Chillin' Like a Villain.
Chillin' like a villain. Love it.
Ben, stop. Just
There's a lot that goes into that.
So if you were going to advise a producer that had never worked in this kind of genre before, how would you advise them? Or how would you let them get into this world? Like if Chillin' Like a Villain is telling them how to be villain, how to do a show like this. What do you have to consider in terms of the music? I mean, do you work with the same songwriters? Mm-hmm. Do you have a staff? Do you,
We have a wonderful supervisor at Disney that helps us. We have a stable of composers and lyricists that we go out to, and they call me.
Like you. And how much lead time do you have in terms of this and involved in casting? What do you look for in terms of, the talent?
Yeah, I get asked that a lot. And, and we're not always looking for triple threat performers. In this particular case here, Ben, who plays the king, has had no background in music or dance. And that's often the case. When we did High School Musical, for example, Zac Efron, who is now, really has broken out and become a major, Hollywood actor, came to us with very little musical and dance background. So there's something else that I'm always looking for. A musicality is important, and owning a rhythm is important. But sometimes there's a theater that can carry a musical moment that doesn't have to come from an extensive background in music necessarily.
Do you think certain things like this could be, it's such a specific genre, it makes it so acceptable, I think, in terms of some themes and ideas that you can talk around? I mean, do you get feedback on that from, you said there were various different people that watched the show, family members together?
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is the demographic for these shows has just grown. And in the beginning, the Disney Channel, I think, really appealed to a younger age demographic. And now it's really across the board, well into family, teenagers. I have kids coming out of university that are already in the job place that come up to me and talk to me about the musicals and how they've impacted their lives and the themes that move through them and how much they enjoy the musical contributions.
Thing. That's great. Now, Christopher, you've worked on an actual Chinese movie here.
I did, yes.
You want to talk about Suddenly 17?
Suddenly 17 was a film that opened last December in China. It opened at #1, I think. And it's the directorial debut of Mo Zhang, who's actually the daughter of Zhang Yimou. And so she shot this romantic comedy about a woman who's 30 years old, but who accidentally eats a magic chocolate and gets transported back to her 17-year-old self.
I want to do that.
I know, right? So it's a fun romantic comedy for the holidays, and I got brought in at the very last minute because they originally had a Chinese composer who wasn't working out, which, that happens in the business, right? A lot of times the original choice doesn't work out. So some poor composer is brought in very last minute and is scrambling to write a lot of music with not a lot of budget because they've actually spent a lot of that budget on the first composer.
What wasn't working?
What
wasn't working?
I don't know. I don't know what wasn't working with the original score. I think the original composer just wasn't delivering. I think they were just sort of choking on the job, and so they just needed someone to jump in and get it done. So I got the call.
Is there a difference, do you notice, between Chinese and American movies in terms of their musical sensibility?
I think so. I mean, I think one of the reasons I got brought on board as an American is that, even though I was born and raised here in the U.S., I still have an awareness of sensibilities in East Asia. And they're all different. I mean, China, there's a certain musical aesthetic and a certain cultural aesthetic. Korea has its own aesthetic as well. And Japan, is probably the aesthetic that's most rooted in Western music, probably because of the post-World War II occupation and so forth. But I think I was brought in because I exhibited awareness of what Chinese audiences might like musically, and the director and I sort of bonded. And she was a director who really wanted a lot of melody in her score. And I think a lot of times these days with film scores, especially here in the West, it's not so much melodically driven as it is atmospheric or sound design. And she wanted sort of an old school romantic comedy score that had themes for every character and just a lot of melody. I always,
Right in
the
the
note
tune.
that yeah, right?
Yeah.
The notes that I kept getting were, Chris, more melody, catchy melody, more catchy, this, right? So that was, I think that's sort of something that you find more in a lot of Asian productions.
And did that lead into the songwriting? the
Yes,
theme?
it did. So one of the tasks was we needed some pop songs in the score too, right? And she wanted these pop songs to be a good sort of melding of the melodic themes in the score, but turned into Chinese pop songs. And I don't speak Mandarin. I speak some Cantonese, but not Mandarin. And so I needed to have a co-writer in China to help me write these songs. And it was a very collaborative process. I write some tracks, send it over, she writes the lyrics and things like that. So the clip that we're going to show actually is one such scene where the 30-year-old version of the main character, she wants to sort of rediscover the inner painter in herself. And in order to do that, she has to eat these magic chocolates and become 17 again when she was an avid painter. And much of the film it's very charming because you have the 30-year-old sort of leaving messages for the 17-year-old and vice versa as they sort of swap psyches. And so this is a little montage where the 17-year-old is teaching the 30-year-old how to paint again.
Lovely.
So, Christopher, was there direction with the song? And was that a popular singer and writer that you wrote with?
Yeah, the singer is actually a Taiwanese singer named La La Su. And you mentioned these singing competitions before in China. They are actually very popular, and she was one of these singers who was sort of discovered on one of these singing shows. And actually, you sort of find that a lot of the winners of these singing shows actually happen to be Taiwanese. There's actually quite a strong sort of vocal tradition out there, and so they tend to do well.
And so, what was the director? Why did the director want a song in that place for that montage? And
I think, it just lent itself pretty well to a montage. She had a particular vision for where she wanted songs, and it was in her head the whole time. And so when I came on board,
you were coming from point A and going to B at the end. How did she want the audience to feel at the end of the song?
how did she wanted just that you were kind of coming along and sort of identifying with the character as the two parts of her psyche, like the 30-year-old and the 17-year-old, finally start to work together. Because up until this point in the movie, they're actually quite at odds. Like, the 17-year-old will sabotage the 30-year-old's, job or boyfriend or things like that, and vice versa. But then they sort of realize, the 30-year-old and the 17-year-old, that they actually have to work together to get their common goals to come to fruition. And so that was the moment where she wanted the song to come in. And the song is called When I Found You, and it's about coming together and working as a team.
I've heard
Use
directors. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, use that melody in the score?
I do, yes. The melody is derived from the score, and then it sort of transforms into the song, and then we kind of peter out back into the score at the end of the song again. So
It's always it seems like it would be an interesting challenge. Melody, lyrics in English, lyrics in Chinese, and how words sound and making the melody work.
yeah, that's why you need a collaborator
Right.
overseas who is fluent in Mandarin. And I very much gave my collaborator freedom to shorten certain phrases if the words weren't going to work.
Right,
If
'cause
my
the
melodic
dialect.
idea was too long, it's like, you can abridge this if you need to. It's okay. The core ideas are still there, but
Right.
make this work as a song. It doesn't need to be a faithful representation of the score melody. It's still close enough, but I just want it to work as a song.
Well, I've had producers and directors say, you know, having a song could save them weeks of shooting because it takes them, okay, we've set up the conflict, we've set up the whole thing, now we've got to get them together. We've got to get to the third act. I can't spend, you know, weeks to, oh, and then I go here, then I thought this, and this, and all of a sudden the song can wrap it up and at the same time express some things that are harder to express just in dialogue and scene by scene.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that leads us to Alex Gustavus with the incredibly successful Gossip Girl in China and all of her shows. She's really redefined in terms of how songs are used to set up character. And I'd just love to talk to you about that, Alex, because in all your work going back to the OC and currently, if it's Scandal, if it's Grey's Anatomy and everything else, I mean, there's so many wonderful musical moments that really give insight into the character, and it's just whether or not that's really, you know, there. I just want to see, do we have the clip of Gossip Girl?
Well, I actually love to talk first and
Yes,
then
okay.
get into it if that's okay. I think, well, to talk about Gossip Girl, produced by Fake Empire, who are the same producers that did do the OC and that currently have Dynasty and upcoming Marvel's Runaways, all sort of coming of age stories. And definitely there was when we first started Gossip Girl, Josh and Stephanie were very sure about wanting to make it different than the OC. That Gossip Girl took place in New York, that they were both coming of age stories, but that we should not use the same music just because these kids were young, and to really define that. And we talked about New York, we talked about what it meant to live on the Upper East Side, sort of all the things that went into what gives Gossip Girl that special sauce. And those included an amazing composer team, the Transcenders, who definitely gave it vibe and a youthful feeling. But they also really always felt music was a character. And we talked about, I had the good fortune of not having to go in late. As Evian, you were saying, like you went in late on Game of Thrones and there was all this stuff that had gone on and you sort of, had to do a lot of fix-it work. With Gossip Girl, by the time there was a pilot script and an outline, I was already talking to them about it. I think that they wanted to use on-camera performances, which they did, and they made music a very natural part of those characters' lives, and I think that's why it's resonated.
Yeah, it's just one of those things where it seems like everyone's talking like you really need to be specific with the music. Like to make it successful, it has to be very specific to the characters. So let's look a little bit of Gossip Girl, another interesting characters in evil. It's so great. Does everybody know what Gossip Girl is about? Everybody knows Gossip Girl is all these texting and things like that. There's this unknown character in the background. Can you talk about the writers? I mean, how much time, the involvement between the producers, the creatives, and the songs, and that whole, because it just seems so seamless. You know, it just seems like, oh, they're writing the scripts and thinking what the song is going to be, and everything just kind of comes together magically.
That one time it happened like that. No, I think that, with these producers and writers, they definitely thought about music a lot in advance. And we had Lady Gaga on camera. We had No Doubt appearing as the 80s band Snowed Out on camera. And they just really gave a lot of room to popular music. But I think sometimes songs were scripted,
But they leave room in the script.
Oh, for
they
sure.
expect the songs to help the narrative.
There's some great, like, if you're looking through scripts, like, awesome song plays, TBD, right? And, like, awesome song plays. I'd better find it. But, of course, like in any project, they left room for montages. They definitely used music to not only as traditional source, but really a score to, that was a major moment. We tied many stories together. The lyrics had to make sense for the environment, for the story, and also leave room for that voiceover, and voiceover was an important part of Gossip Girl, and there was always a voiceover component.
And is it to hit what is not being expressed, or is there something the song expressed that's not expressed in this script? Is it?
Yeah, I think they did it all sorts of ways. I think in this particular, I think that was, you're supposed to feel a little triumphant, a little sad, a little all of it. And I think, that band, obviously, the Bravery, was super popular, and it was, we tried to not only use up-and-coming bands, but also really look into the pop landscape. And we had Timberlake on the show, and all sorts of pop.
So forward-thinking. I love it. Love when songs like this they comment, but there's also like a forward motion in the song that you're going forward. It's not like I have nothing to believe in. You know what I mean? And it's like the action stops,
right.
In a way. But we're into the Q&A, so we haven't really gotten to, I don't know if there's anybody who has questions. We were going to go a little bit into the financing of stuff, thinking there were producers here. Any questions?
Kind of a question regarding the financing. Is there a certain pressure when you're working with a TV show or a film in creating original scores versus licensing and sourcing existing content? Because at the end of the day, when the budget's concerned, it might cost more to create the original score than to license it, but then they also want to use the music for they might want to do a soundtrack and sell that, and they could get more from an artist tied to that soundtrack. So just kind of curious about if there's that specific pressure on one way or the other.
I would think that each project has its own set of parameters based on the goal that the music set out to do. And HBO, as a general rule, would not buy score. We do license lots and lots and lots of third-party music, and usually pay for and own the score, which creates revenue in itself, and to the original notion of putting that on a soundtrack and stuff to keep that, generally speaking. Although in small projects, independent films or things that have a really, really tight budget, there's times where you could do a package deal for a really low amount of money of pre-existing music. But by and large, the first position would be to own anything that's created originally and have the score be original content when possible.
But I think it goes, and maybe you guys come back, it does, what's your story about? Who are you trying to attract it to? So if you're, Kenny had talked about it a little bit, and you guys talked a little bit, if it's a romantic comedy, how is the music serving the story? And I think, for my part, it's the most, if the more you put into it, is the more you're going to get out of it.
I was going to say that it really has a lot to do, as you said, Evian, that the project. I directed an independent film a couple of years back called A Change of Heart, and licensing material was an important part because we wanted to tap into musical history, that we wanted to show that the main character was invested in old R&B and blues. And so we could have created new R&B and blues to sound old, but we just felt that it was going to be, more serving of the story to go back and grab something that was, pertinent and to that period that he was invested in.
Well, you talked about that with Fahrenheit, and we made a comment about what you did on Fahrenheit, what you're doing on Fahrenheit and Westworld, for example.
Yeah, well, Westworld takes contemporary songs and incorporates them into the piano playing. We can cross the fourth wall because it's in a future world that's created this Western world. So recognizing a piece of music doesn't really change the storytelling because it's all a fake world anyway, but it also does something to make people familiar with it or have an aha moment in those beats when all of a sudden you hear Soundgarden playing or Pearl Jam playing or Radiohead playing on the piano. And we create that, Ramin Javadi does that show as well, which is crazy. He's got 2 amazingly popular shows on HBO. So yeah, that vehicle works in that.
But on Fahrenheit, that's coming up, you can't have any existing.
Yeah, well,
music.
Fahrenheit is from the book, the Fahrenheit 451, and basically art has been outlawed. So we have a sterile world, and the underground world is trying to keep art alive. So when we're in the sterile world, the score is very, very synthetic and very metallic, and there is no songs. And when we're in the underground world, then there is the instrumentation of the score is warmer, it's more acoustic, it's more organic, and we also use songs as kind of their calling card to hang on to the art form and to rebel against the oppression. Yeah.
So, in Gossip World, all these shows, do you think like using existing contemporary music? I mean, how does that serve the story?
I mean, I think it does, and I think to just quickly answer your question, I think in most cases there are so many amazing, talented composers that are affordable at the beginnings of their careers that I would think you'd love something custom that no matter how great the music library is or how great your collection of pieces, there's nothing like an artist composer working with the artist director to really make something wonderful. And so that would be my opinion about that. But although I work alongside the composer, like I spend most of my days finding third-party tracks, finding licensed tracks, or having them created. And I think there could be anything from a cover, which is something that we've used a lot on Grey's Anatomy, or I work on period shows. I worked on Mad Men, and is it exactly in 1962 in November that Don Draper would have heard that tune, or is it so I think that as supervisors, our job is to do the job, and that job can be the most current music, like Gossip Girl, or making sure that we're telling the story historically accurately.
And the character. You have another question? Does somebody want to pick someone, or do I pick in the back?
Excuse me. Sir?
Hi there. My question is about the financing. So there was a UK-China co-production deal that was announced in January of this past year. Are you seeing more of UK music because of the benefits on the financing side coming to the US as a partnership, or for that matter, going straight to China? And is that money being used as an ancillary stream to return money to investors?
Well, I'll say that HBO, as a rule, does a lot of co-productions, and also if we're doing a production, they usually look where the tax credit is. So you're talking about the UK. A lot of scores are recorded in the UK, one because of the union here and the getting around certain residual payments that would be due. But also, like I might get a phone call, they say, we really want to look for a composer or in the UK because we have a tax credit, and per hour that you spend on employees that are UK based, you get a certain amount of tax credit. California has an incentive too. I don't necessarily feel as a music supervisor that I get any kind of merger between two major venture capital things, and that really affects what I do. But sometimes we're led certain places because it's the benefit, and that tax benefit comes right back into the production.
There's a significant amount of mitigation of risk for an investor on the side of music through seed enterprise investment scheme and enterprise investment scheme. I'm just seeing a lot more investors being savvy about where they're putting their money because they can mitigate their risk. So you're not seeing that at HBO?
No,
but
and that's
there's-
not really I would just
It's
say
over
that's
their
above
head.
my pay grade.
There's some independent films that will basically sell the publishing rights to their score to like a third party, and that'll help them pay for something else. I worked on a film called Young Victoria. They did that in order to help fund an original song because they, it warranted it or whatever.
And the
But
revenue
that
stream that comes from that afterwards.
They didn't let me know about that because and I might have gotten them more money if they did. I have no idea, but that's my hubris. But Christopher can talk a little bit about how you do save money on scores on what he did with 17.
Scoring is a very international sort of operation nowadays. I mean, when I was scoring 17, I got brought in last minute, and I was actually already committed to another project, a big Cirque du Soleil show. And so I was literally in London recording the Cirque du Soleil show with an orchestra there, and at nights listening in online while an orchestra in Macedonia was recording my Suddenly 17 score. And there's just so many different options for recording nowadays around the world, and sample libraries have gotten really, actually very convincing that, to go back to her question in the front row there, there's just a lot of ways to make an original music budget work. And composers these days are very good at finding ways to do scores cheaply. It's just what we're good at nowadays. So it's a shame, but we're...
Well, you still want them to be brilliant, you know what I mean? So I wouldn't go into, I hope people think about it you want it to be great, just like special effects. Yeah, you could probably get really cheap special effects, but you're taking a risk,
right,
too, in that it could be really cheap and actually blow more of your budget by not doing it the right way. Now, there was a question. You already answered it? I'm out of time.
Oh, yeah, see, it says wrap up right there.
One more question. Well, thank you so much. If you have a question, come on afterwards, and I'm happy, someone answer. Thank you so much.
Everybody.